My name is Natalie, and I bought my parents a $2.2 million mansion for their 50th anniversary. When I arrived, my custom furniture was scattered across the lawn. My brother-in-law stood in the foyer with champagne screaming that I was trespassing. The real shock came when my sobbing mother grabbed my arm and confessed she had already signed the house over to him to pay his debts. She told me to walk away because I had enough money. At 34 years old, I just learned that blood means absolutely nothing when money is on the line. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever realized your family only loved what you could provide for them. The coastal fog usually brought me peace, but today the chill cut deep. I parked my rental car staring at the property I had secretly purchased 3 weeks ago. I had spent months planning this surprise. I even hired an interior designer to fill the home with my parents' favorite coastal aesthetics. But as I walked up the flagstone path, I saw my carefully chosen velvet armchairs and mahogany side tables dumped carelessly onto the wet grass. The heavy oak front door was wide open. Jamal, my 38-year-old brother-in-law, stood in the grand foyer. He was wearing a tailored navy suit that screamed Wall Street investment broker, swirling a glass of expensive champagne. Rachel, my 36-year-old sister, leaned against the marble kitchen island behind him, admiring her reflection in the glass cabinets. "What are you doing here, Natalie?" Jamal barked, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I took a step inside. "What am I doing here? I bought this house. Why is my furniture on the lawn?" Jamal laughed. A sharp, arrogant sound. He took a sip of his champagne and pointed a finger directly at my face. "You are mistaken. This is my house, and you are trespassing on private property. Get out before I have you physically removed." I looked past him, searching for the two people this house was meant for. My father Richard stood frozen in the corner near the fireplace, staring at the floor like a coward. My mother Carol was pacing near the staircase, her face flushed and streaked with tears. I stepped toward her, fully expecting her to explain this sick joke. "Mom, tell him to get out," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Instead of defending me, my mother rushed forward and gripped my forearm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. "Natalie, please," she cried, her voice trembling. "You need to leave. Just go." I stared at her, completely bewildered. "What are you talking about? I bought this house for you and Dad." My mother shook her head frantically. "I know, and we are so grateful. But Jamal is in terrible trouble. His investments went bad. He owes a lot of money to very dangerous people. I signed the quitclaim deed over to him this morning. His family needs this house to survive. You have plenty of money, Natalie. Just let them have it. Consider it a gift to your sister." Time stopped. I looked at Rachel, who was now smirking, entirely unbothered by her husband's supposed life-threatening debt. Then I looked back at the woman who gave birth to me. At 18 years old, I watched this exact same woman empty my entire college savings account to pay off Rachel's maxed-out credit cards because Rachel deserved a fresh start. I had worked 3 jobs to put myself through state college while Rachel traveled Europe. Now, 16 years later, my mother was demanding I hand over a $2 million mansion to save her golden child once again. I did not scream. I did not cry. The sheer audacity of her betrayal burned away any lingering childhood desire I had for her approval. "You cannot just sign away a house that does not belong to you," I stated, stepping back to break her grip on my arm. Jamal sneered, pulling his smartphone from his suit pocket. "I told you to leave. Now you are harassing my family." He tapped the screen aggressively. "Yes, operator, I need police at my residence immediately. I have a hostile trespasser refusing to leave. Send police officers now." My sister laughed softly from the kitchen. "You should have just stayed in San Francisco, Natalie. You never belonged here anyway." I stood my ground as the distant wail of a siren began to echo through the coastal hills. I was absolutely not leaving them. The legal war for my stolen property had just officially begun right now. 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of two Monterey County Sheriff patrol cars reflected off the massive glass facade of the mansion. Heavy boots crunched against the gravel driveway as two officers approached the front steps. Immediately, the aggressive screaming man who had just threatened me vanished completely. In his place, Jamal smoothly transformed into the picture of a concerned, law-abiding citizen. He adjusted his expensive suit jacket, walked out to meet the officers with a warm, cooperative smile, and handed them a crisp white document. "Officer, thank you for coming so quickly," Jamal said smoothly, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "We have a family disturbance. My sister-in-law is refusing to leave my property. Here is the quitclaim deed transferring ownership of this house directly to me. It was signed and notarized just this morning by the previous owners, my wife's parents." One officer, a tall man with a stern face, took the paper and reviewed it. It looked incredibly official. It had my parents' signatures clearly printed at the bottom. My mother watched from the doorway, twisting a tissue in her hands, while my father stared intensely at his own shoes, too cowardly to even make eye contact with the police. Then Rachel stepped forward, gently placing a manicured hand on Jamal's arm. She looked at the officers with wide, innocent eyes. "I am so sorry you had to come out here," she sighed softly. "My sister Natalie has always been deeply unstable. She has this pathological jealousy regarding our family. She just cannot stand to see my husband and me succeeding, so she followed us here to cause a scene. Please, she just needs to be escorted off the premises before she has a mental breakdown." I stared at my sister, marveling at how easily the lies poured from her mouth. The officer turned to me, his expression hardening, clearly buying their elaborate performance. "Mom, I am going to have to ask you to step off the property," he commanded, his hand resting casually near his utility belt. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I looked directly at Rachel and smiled coldly. "Jealous," I repeated, making sure my voice carried clearly over the ocean breeze. "You mean the same way I was jealous when you convinced Mom and Dad to drain my entire college savings fund to pay for your lavish destination wedding in Cabo. The wedding where I was forced to stay home and work a double shift at a diner just to pay my own rent." Rachel's perfectly applied blush seemed to drain from her cheeks. The officers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the deep, bitter history simmering beneath the surface. I turned my attention back to the officer holding the document. "That piece of paper Jamal just handed you is entirely worthless," I stated clearly. "My parents could not legally sign a quitclaim deed for this property because they never owned it. They were never on the title." Jamal scoffed loudly. "Do not listen to her, officer. She is delusional. Look at the signatures." I calmly pulled my phone from my purse and unlocked it. I opened my web browser and navigated straight to the Monterey County Property Tax Portal, a public government database. I typed in the address of the mansion and hit search. I stepped closer to the officers and held the bright screen up for them to read. "Take a close look at the current owner of record," I instructed. It does not say Carol or Richard. It says Ocean View Holdings LLC. That is a private corporate entity. And as of 3 weeks ago, I am the sole managing member and registered agent of that LLC. I bought this property entirely in cash through my company. My parents were only supposed to be the beneficiaries of a trust living here rent-free. They possess zero equity, zero title rights, and absolutely no legal authority to transfer this estate to anyone. That paper Jamal gave you is fraudulent." The stern officer frowned, pulling out his own radio to call dispatch and verify the public property records. We stood in tense silence for 3 excruciating minutes. Only the sound of crashing waves filled the void. Finally, the radio crackled. Dispatch confirmed my statement. The property was legally deeded to the LLC. The officer handed the fake deed back to Jamal, whose jaw was visibly clenched. "Sir," the officer said firmly, "this is a civil matter regarding corporate property and disputed deeds. We cannot enforce an eviction or make an arrest based on this document. You all need to take this up in a civil court with your attorneys. Have a good day." Without another word, the officers returned to their cruisers. We watched the patrol cars back out of the driveway and disappear down the winding coastal road. The second they were out of sight, Jamal's polite mask shattered completely. His face contorted into an ugly, triumphant sneer. He took a step toward me, closing the distance until I could smell the champagne on his breath. "You think you are so smart with your little corporate databases?" He hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think that LLC means anything to me? It means nothing. I already took that deed you call worthless to a private lender. I used this house as collateral for a $1 million hard money loan yesterday, and the cash is already gone. Good luck getting your precious property back from the syndicate, Natalie." I drove away from the mansion with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The ocean breeze no longer felt refreshing. It felt like ice. I pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel in downtown Carmel, booked a room, and went straight upstairs. I did not bother unpacking my overnight bag. I sat on the edge of the king-size bed, pulled out my laptop, and immediately dialed my corporate attorney, David. David had guided me through the $40 million sale of my real estate software company. He was sharp, ruthless, and deeply familiar with property law. I explained everything that had just happened on the front porch. I told him about the forged quitclaim deed and Jamal's arrogant confession about securing a $1 million hard money loan. David was dead silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely devoid of its usual warmth. "Natalie," he said slowly, "hard money lenders do not issue million-dollar loans based on a simple residential deed. If the property is legally owned by your corporate entity, Ocean View Holdings, they would require the managing director of that company to sign the commercial loan documents. Did you sign anything?" I told him I absolutely did not. "Then Jamal has a massive problem," David explained. "But your parents have a worse one. For Jamal to get that money, he either forged your signature or he had your parents present themselves to the lender as the authorized directors of your company. They crossed state lines electronically to wire those funds. That is not a family misunderstanding. That is federal wire fraud and felony identity theft. Your parents and your brother-in-law just committed federal crimes to steal $1 million. A heavy knot formed in my stomach. Before I could process the sheer magnitude of what my own family had done, my phone vibrated against the mattress. It was my father, Richard. I answered the call foolishly, hoping the reality of the police visit had finally snapped him out of his cowardly submission. I hoped he was calling to apologize. "Natalie, I need you to calm down," my father said. His tone was condescending, the exact same voice he used when I was a teenager upset about Rachel stealing my things. "Calm down," I repeated, utterly stunned. "Dad, you and Mom just participated in a massive real estate fraud. Do you have any idea what Jamal has done?" My father sighed heavily. "Stop being so dramatic, Natalie. You are always trying to make your sister look bad. Jamal is an investment broker. He works with high-level clients and he knows exactly what he is doing. He just needed some temporary liquidity for a massive portfolio deal. He will pay the loan back with interest in a few weeks. Do not ruin your sister's marriage over a house you do not even need. You have millions in the bank. Why are you being so greedy?" I closed my eyes. The sheer manipulation was staggering. My parents were willing to risk federal prison just to maintain the illusion that Rachel had married a successful man. They genuinely believed my hard-earned assets were simply a safety net for Rachel's perfect life. I realized then that my father was not a victim in this. He was an active, willing participant in my destruction. "I am not being greedy, Dad," I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I am protecting myself from your criminal son-in-law. If you want to go down with him, that is your choice." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the desk. I walked over to the window, staring out at the darkening sky over the Pacific Ocean. My phone chimed with a new email notification. It was from the private investigator I kept on retainer from my corporate tech days. After leaving the mansion, I had texted him Jamal's full name and asked for an immediate deep-dive financial background check. I opened the encrypted file and began to read. The knot in my stomach turned into cold, hard dread. My father claimed Jamal was managing high-level portfolios. The investigator found the exact opposite. Jamal had not made a legitimate stock trade in over 18 months. He was drowning in hidden debt. The investigator tracked the routing numbers from the hard money loan. That $1 million did not go into an investment fund or a brokerage account. Within 30 minutes of the loan clearing, Jamal had wired the entire sum to offshore accounts tied directly to an illegal underground gambling syndicate based out of Las Vegas. Jamal was not a brilliant broker suffering a temporary setback. He was a desperate gambling addict. And he had just handed over a fake deed to a ruthless criminal syndicate who now believed they owned my $2 million home. 2 days later, I stood watching valets park luxury cars along the coastal road. Rachel and Jamal wasted no time. They threw a massive catered housewarming party to establish dominance in their high society circle. A live string quartet played beautiful music as waiters quickly circulated, carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne. It was a breathtaking display of stolen wealth. I stepped out wearing a custom-tailored ivory suit. I felt composed. Flanking me were two men. On my right was David, my corporate attorney carrying a slim leather briefcase. On my left was a man named Thomas, a licensed process server dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit to blend in seamlessly with the wealthy guests. We walked right past the valet stand and straight through the open front doors. No one stopped us. The sheer confidence of our entrance made the hired security assume we were VIP guests. The inside of the mansion was packed with over 100 people. Rachel was holding court in the gourmet kitchen, laughing loudly as she showed off the custom marble countertops I had personally selected. Jamal was out on the back patio surrounded by a group of older men holding a cigar and boasting about his brilliant market strategies. My parents were there too. My mother was wearing a new designer dress, glowing under the attention of her country club friends, as she proudly pointed to Rachel. My father stood near the bar, nodding along to whatever lies Rachel was spinning. They looked so incredibly happy. They looked like a picture-perfect family who had finally achieved the status they always craved. I stood near the edge of the patio watching them celebrate their felony. Thomas, the process server, stood quietly near the buffet table sipping a sparkling water. David stood beside me, his eyes scanning the room with the cold calculation of a predator. He leaned in and whispered over the music. "They really have no idea what is coming, do they?" "Not a clue," I replied softly. Suddenly, the string quartet stopped playing. A sharp ringing sound echoed through the speakers as someone tapped a microphone. I looked toward the center of the patio. My Uncle Greg, a loud and notoriously arrogant man who had always favored Rachel, was standing by the pool with a microphone in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. He beamed at Jamal, who smiled back with false modesty. "Can I get everyone's attention?" Uncle Greg boomed, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I want to make a toast to my incredible niece Rachel and her brilliant husband Jamal. We always knew you two were going places, but this house is truly a masterpiece." The crowd clapped politely. My mother wiped a theatrical tear from her eye. "Jamal is a true self-made titan," Uncle Greg continued, gesturing grandly with his glass. "He worked hard, he invested smart, and he built a beautiful life for his family. He is a real provider. It just goes to show what you can achieve when you have vision and charm. It is a stark contrast to some other people in this family who might have a little money but zero class." Uncle Greg paused, waiting for a few chuckles from his friends. "We all know who I am talking about," he added with a cruel smirk. "Some people just sit alone in the dark, staring at computer screens all day, hoarding their little tech paychecks because they are too lonely and awkward to build a real family. But Rachel and Jamal, they know how to live. To the new king and queen of Carmel." The crowd raised their glasses. "Hear, hear," they echoed. I did not feel angry. I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. Every single person cheering for them was applauding an illusion paid for by my money and funded by a violent criminal syndicate. I handed my designer clutch to David and walked smoothly through the quiet crowd. The guests parted slightly as they noticed my ivory suit. Rachel saw me first and her smile instantly vanished, her face drained of all color. Jamal turned his smug expression freezing as I confidently stepped up onto the small raised platform next to the pool. I did not ask for permission. I reached out and firmly took the microphone straight out of Uncle Greg's hand before he even realized what was happening. I turned to face the silent, staring crowd of wealthy elites. I tapped the microphone twice, ensuring it was on. "Thank you for that lovely introduction, Uncle Greg," I said, my voice perfectly steady and amplified across the entire estate. "Since we are all here celebrating this beautiful home, let us talk about exactly how Jamal funded this party." The microphone fed back slightly, making a high-pitched squeal that forced the guests to cover their ears. I looked out over the sea of horrified, wealthy faces. I nodded to David and Thomas, who immediately unzipped the leather briefcases they had been carrying. They walked methodically through the crowd, placing thick white folders on the linen-covered cocktail tables. They handed copies directly to the most prominent members of my parents' social circle. I watched my mother step back in confusion. My father crossed his arms, trying to look authoritative, but his hands were trembling against his chest. "Go ahead and open them," I instructed the crowd. "What you are looking at are the official federal and state documents proving that my brother-in-law Jamal did not buy this mansion. I bought it. 3 weeks ago, I purchased this property entirely in cash through my corporate entity, Ocean View Holdings. Jamal and Rachel do not own a single square foot of this estate. They are nothing but trespassers throwing a party in a home they stole." A collective gasp rippled across the patio as the local elites flipped through the legal paperwork. I saw Uncle Greg lower his glass, his smug expression wiped away as he read the undeniable proof. The polite murmurs instantly turned into shocked whispers. "But Jamal is not just a liar." I continued, my voice echoing off the marble walls. 2 days ago, he had my parents pose as the executive directors of my company. They forged corporate documents and signed a fraudulent quitclaim deed. Jamal then used that forged deed to take out a $1 million hard money loan. He did not invest that money. He wired every single penny of it to an illegal gambling syndicate because he is completely broke and drowning in debt. This entire party is being funded by stolen money and federal wire fraud. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the crashing ocean waves. Then Rachel completely snapped. She lunged forward, her face twisted in absolute rage. She grabbed a folder and ripped the documents in half, throwing the pieces into the swimming pool. "She is lying," Rachel screamed, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. "Do not listen to a single word she says. Look at her. She is 34 years old and completely alone. She has no husband. She is utterly barren and miserable. She has spent her entire life obsessing over me because I actually have a family and a man who loves me." Rachel ran to the edge of the patio and violently pulled her 2 young children toward her. She gripped their shoulders, pushing them forward like human shields. "She is just a bitter, jealous woman trying to destroy my family." Rachel sobbed, forcing tears down her face. "She wants to make her own niece and nephew homeless just to punish me for being happy. She faked all of these documents because she cannot stand that Jamal is a successful provider while she goes home to an empty apartment every night. We are the victims." My parents rushed to Rachel's side, falling for her manipulative performance. My mother glared at me with pure hatred, wrapping her arms around Rachel's shoulders. "How could you do this to your sister?" my mother wailed, playing to the crowd. "Have you no shame, Natalie?" I did not flinch. I did not get defensive. I simply stood on the raised platform and looked down at them with absolute cold disgust. The crowd of guests, however, was no longer paying attention to my mother's theatrical cries. The wealthy elites were already backing away toward the exits, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a federal fraud scandal. "You can call me barren and jealous all you want, Rachel," I said, speaking directly into the microphone. "You can play the victim and use your children as props to gain sympathy. But the reality is, your husband stole $1 million from very dangerous people. And those people do not care about your fake tears. Jamal finally stepped forward, his fists clenched tight. You shut your mouth right now, he threatened, his voice shaking with intense rage and sheer panic. You do not know what you are talking about. I am a licensed broker. I own this house, and I will destroy you. Are you sure about that? Jamal, I asked softly. I lowered the microphone and pointed toward the heavy glass doors at the back of the patio. Jamal froze. Rachel stopped crying. Every single guest turned to follow the direction of my finger. 3 men had just stepped onto the terrace. They were massive, heavily muscled, and wearing sharp, dark suits. They did not look like police officers. They moved with a terrifying, calculated silence. The guests immediately scrambled out of their way, parting like the Red Sea. These were the men Jamal had borrowed the $1 million from. The Las Vegas syndicate had arrived to collect their debt, and they were staring directly at Jamal. The silence on the patio was absolute. The 3 men did not rush. They walked with the heavy, deliberate steps of predators who had finally cornered their prey. The guests who had just been toasting to Jamal's brilliance now pressed their backs against the stone walls of the mansion, desperate to become invisible. The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered man with a thick neck and cold, dead eyes, stopped barely a foot away from Jamal. "Hello, Jamal," the man said. His voice was low, gravelly, and completely devoid of emotion. "You have been ignoring my phone calls. We do not like being ignored." Jamal, the arrogant broker, who had just threatened to destroy me, was now trembling so violently that the ice clinked against the glass in his hand. He took a step backward, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an escape route. "Listen, I can explain," Jamal stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "The bank just needs a few more days to clear the transfer. It is a minor administrative hold." The lead thug snatched the glass out of Jamal's hand and smashed it onto the marble deck. "There is no administrative hold," Jamal the man barked. "The title insurance company flagged the deed you gave us. They froze the collateral because the property belongs to a corporate holding company. You tried to hand us a fake deed. And to make matters worse, that personal check you wrote us to cover this week's interest bounced yesterday. You lied to my boss, and you tried to pay us with monopoly money." Rachel let out a sharp gasp. She looked at Jamal, her eyes wide with terror, finally realizing that every single word I had just spoken into the microphone was the absolute truth. Jamal was not a titan of industry. He was a desperate fraud who had just brought violent criminals to our doorstep. "We want our $1 million back," Jamal the man stated, stepping closer until he was chest to chest with my brother-in-law. "And we want the $200,000 in interest you owe us, right now." Jamal looked at the massive men surrounding him. Then he looked at Rachel. He did not step in front of his wife to protect her. He did not try to negotiate to keep his children safe. Pure selfish cowardice took over. Jamal turned on his heel and bolted toward the sliding glass doors leading into the living room. My father Richard was standing directly in his path. Richard raised his hands, palms out, trying to play the peacemaker. "Now hold on, gentlemen," my father started to say, stepping right into the doorway. "Let us just talk about this reasonably." Jamal did not even slow down. In his blind panic to escape his own mess, he slammed his hands hard into my father's chest. He shoved the 72-year-old man violently out of the way. My father lost his balance completely. His arms flailed backward as he tumbled down the 3 steep stone steps leading from the patio to the lower garden. A sickening crunch echoed over the sound of the ocean. My father let out a raw, agonizing scream, gripping his arm. His wrist was shattered, the bone bent at a horrifying, unnatural angle. My mother dropped to her knees beside him, shrieking hysterically. "Richard! Oh my God, Richard!" she wailed, her hands hovering over his mangled wrist, afraid to touch it. The remaining guests had seen enough. Total chaos erupted. Wealthy socialites pushed past each other, dropping designer bags and abandoning their luxury cars to run blindly down the driveway. They wanted no part of a federal fraud investigation, and they certainly wanted no part of a violent syndicate collection. The loan sharks completely ignored my bleeding father crying on the ground. As Jamal disappeared deep into the mansion, the lead thug turned his attention to Rachel. He lunged forward and grabbed the collar of her expensive silk dress, yanking her violently toward him. Rachel screamed, trying to pull away, but the man held her tight, his face inches from hers. "Where is the money?" he demanded, shaking her. Before he could do anything else, a sharp, authoritative voice rang out. "Let her go right now." It was Thomas, the man I had brought to serve the legal papers. He stepped directly between Rachel and the loan shark. Thomas pulled back his charcoal suit jacket, just enough to reveal the heavy black firearm holstered at his hip. Instantly, two other men dressed as valets who I had secretly hired from an elite private security firm materialized behind Thomas, their hands resting casually on their own concealed weapons. The syndicate leader slowly released Rachel's dress. He evaluated the situation. 3 armed security contractors and dozens of fleeing witnesses made this a bad play. He took a step back, smoothing his lapels. "Tell your husband he cannot hide the man," said his voice carrying a chilling finality. "You tell Jamal he has 48 hours to produce our cash. After that, he is a dead man." Without another word, the 3 men turned and walked calmly back through the mansion, leaving my sister sobbing on the marble floor and my family completely shattered. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Monterey County General Hospital emergency room buzzed loudly above us. The smell of strong antiseptic and stale coffee filled the empty waiting area. My father had been rushed through the double doors on a stretcher, groaning in agony, while paramedics worked desperately to stabilize his shattered wrist. I sat on a hard plastic chair holding a cold paper cup of water. David, my attorney, had stayed behind at the mansion with the private security team to ensure the property was secured, and no one else from the party tried to enter. I was completely alone with my mother. Carol was pacing frantically back and forth across the scuffed linoleum floor. Her expensive designer dress was wrinkled, and her perfect hair was a disheveled mess. She kept muttering to herself under her breath, clutching her luxury handbag tightly against her chest, as if it could protect her from reality. I watched her pacing, expecting her to finally realize the monster she had welcomed into our family. Jamal had just nearly killed her husband to save himself. I genuinely thought this would be the moment the delusion finally broke. I was completely wrong. My mother stopped pacing abruptly and turned to face me. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was absolutely no sorrow in them. There was only a deep, burning resentment directed entirely at me. "Look at what you did," she hissed, pointing a trembling manicured finger at my face. "Look at what you caused Natalie. Your father is in surgery right now because of your selfish little stunt." I set the paper cup down on the small table next to me. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice perfectly flat. Jamal shoved Dad down a flight of stone steps to save his own skin. Jamal did that. Not me. My mother marched over to my chair and stood over me, casting a shadow. "If you had just stayed away, none of this would have happened," she snapped, her voice rising in the quiet room. "If you had just let him have the house quietly, he could have figured out a way to pay those awful men back. But no, you had to bring a lawyer. You had to show off in front of the whole country club and humiliate him. You provoked him, Natalie. You backed him into a corner and forced those thugs to come after him. This is all your fault." I stared at her, letting the absolute insanity of her words wash over me. She was actually blaming me for exposing a federal wire fraud scheme that her golden son-in-law had committed. The psychological grip Jamal and Rachel had on her was terrifying. "Listen to me, Natalie," my mother commanded, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. "Those men gave Jamal 48 hours. They are going to kill him. And if they do not kill him, the federal investigators will send him to prison. You are going to fix this right now." "Fix it?" I asked softly. "How exactly do you expect me to fix $1 million syndicate debt?" "You pay it," my mother demanded, her eyes wide with a manic, frantic desperation. "You transfer the $1 million to those men tomorrow morning. You pay the $200,000 in interest. You clear his debt. You do it for the sake of your niece and nephew. You cannot let those innocent children grow up without a father. You have money saved up from your little software business. Empty your accounts. Take out a huge mortgage. Do whatever you have to do save this family. I slowly stood up from the plastic chair. I was now taller than her, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like an expendable resource for her favorite daughter. I do not need to take out a mortgage, Mom, I said calmly. And I do not need to empty my savings accounts. 3 days ago, I officially closed a deal to sell my software startup to a global tech conglomerate. The corporate buyout was finalized for $40 million in cash. I have more than enough liquid capital sitting in my bank account right now to pay off Jamal's criminal debt 50 times over without even feeling it. My mother gasped loudly. The intense anger in her eyes instantly transformed into a greedy, desperate relief. She reached out and grabbed both of my hands, squeezing them tightly. 40 million, she whispered, breathless and wide-eyed. Oh, Natalie, thank God. Thank God. You can save us. You can pay them tomorrow, and this whole terrible nightmare will be over. Please transfer the funds first thing in the morning. I gently pulled my hands out of her grasp. I took a deliberate step back, putting a cold physical distance between us. You misunderstood me, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, hard whisper. I said I have the money. I could pay it off right now with a single phone call, but I will not give Jamal a single cent. Let the syndicate have him. The silence between us lasted for a fraction of a second. Then my mother raised her right hand and slapped me across the face with all the strength she had. The sharp sound cracked like a whip, echoing violently down the empty hospital hallway. My cheek burned instantly, but I did not blink. I did not raise my hand to touch my face. I just stared back at her, completely unbreakable. The sting on my left cheek was intensely sharp, but my expression never changed. My mother stood there breathing heavily, her hands still hovering in the air between us. She looked momentarily shocked by her own violence, as if she expected me to break down crying and beg for her forgiveness. I did not shed a single tear. I slowly turned my head and looked down the hallway. The head nurse, a stern woman in dark blue scrubs, had heard the sharp crack of the slap and was marching directly toward us with a deeply concerned expression. "Ma'am, is everything all right here?" the nurse asked, looking between my mother and me. "Do I need to call hospital security?" My mother immediately opened her mouth to play the victim, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Everything is perfectly fine," I told the nurse in a calm, even voice. "However, I need to make an urgent administrative update to this patient's file. I am Richard and Carol's daughter, but effective immediately, I am entirely revoking my status as their emergency contact. I am removing my name from all of their medical directives. I assume absolutely zero financial responsibility for any medical bills incurred during this hospital stay or any future visits. You will need to contact their other daughter, Rachel, for all medical decisions and all billing inquiries. She is the only family they have left now." My mother let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. "Natalie, you cannot do this," she pleaded, her previous rage evaporating into pure selfish panic. "We cannot afford this surgery. Your father needs specialized orthopedic care. You cannot just abandon us here." I looked at her one last time, recognizing that she was nothing more than a stranger to me. I turned my back to her. "Watch me," I said. I walked out of the sliding glass doors of the emergency room, stepping out into the cool, dark night air. I did not look back. I got into my rental car and drove back to my hotel, completely severing the toxic emotional anchor that had dragged me down for 34 years. While I was finally finding my peace, Jamal was spiraling into absolute violent madness. He had less than 48 hours to come up with $1,200,000, or the Las Vegas syndicate was going to kill him. He knew he could not get the money from me. He knew his fraudulent broker career was completely over, and his wealthy friends had abandoned him. Desperation is a terrifying thing. It strips away all logic and reduces a person to a feral, dangerous animal simply trying to survive. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Jamal drove his luxury car back to the Carmel mansion. My private security team had finished their initial shift, and David, my attorney, had locked down the property for the night. The mansion was completely dark and silent, sitting isolated against the coastline. Jamal parked a block away and crept onto the property like a common, desperate thief. He bypassed the heavy front door, entirely moving to the side of the house and throwing a heavy landscaping rock straight through a beautiful custom-stained glass window. He climbed through the shattered glass, cutting his arms and ruining his expensive suit in the process, but he did not care. He was entirely unhinged. If he could not own the mansion, he was going to completely gut it. He brought a heavy steel crowbar and a sledgehammer from his trunk. His deranged plan was to strip the house of any valuable construction materials to sell on the black market for quick, untraceable cash. Jamal walked into the grand gourmet kitchen and swung the heavy sledgehammer violently into the custom imported marble countertops I had carefully selected. The beautiful, expensive stone shattered into jagged, useless pieces, scattering across the floor. He moved into the living room walls, swinging the steel crowbar to rip open the perfectly painted drywall. He reached into the gaping holes and began violently pulling out the thick bundles of expensive copper wiring. He was tearing the electrical system completely apart, blindly destroying millions of dollars of property in a pathetic attempt to harvest a few $1,000s in scrap metal. He grunted and cursed, sweating profusely, as he ripped up the expensive hardwood floors, looking for anything he could pry loose and sell. He thought he was entirely alone. He thought he was getting away with destroying the last physical connection I had to that house. He was completely wrong. When I purchased the mansion, I had personally installed a state-of-the-art smart home security system engineered by the very real estate software company I had just sold. It was completely invisible. There were no bulky cameras or obvious motion sensors to warn him. The second Jamal shattered the side window, the silent alarms instantly triggered. The system did not blare a loud siren to scare him away. Instead, it quietly activated hidden high-definition night vision cameras positioned in every single room of the house. As Jamal swung his sledgehammer into the marble, the security system was simultaneously streaming a crystal-clear live video feed directly to my smartphone and instantly routing the footage straight to the dispatch center of the Monterey County Police Department. The police were already on their way, watching him commit felony vandalism in real time. Within 7 minutes of Jamal smashing the stained glass window, the Monterey County Police arrived at the mansion. They did not use their sirens. Dispatch had explicitly informed them that a live video feed showed a suspect actively destroying the interior with a sledgehammer. 3 patrol cars parked silently at the edge of the driveway. 6 officers drew their weapons and approached the property with tactical precision. Inside the mansion, Jamal was completely oblivious. He was drenched in sweat, standing in the center of the ruined living room, swinging his crowbar into the drywall. He was so consumed by his own violent rage that he did not hear the heavy boots crossing the hardwood floor behind him. "Drop the weapon and put your hands on your head," an officer shouted, illuminating Jamal with a blinding tactical flashlight. Jamal spun around, dropping the crowbar in sheer panic. He immediately threw his hands into the air, blinking against the harsh light. "What are you doing?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "You cannot arrest me. This is my property. I am the owner of this house." The lead officer did not hesitate. He stepped forward, grabbed Jamal by the collar of his ruined suit, and slammed him hard against the only unbroken section of the wall. "We have you on high-definition video, breaking into an estate owned by a corporate entity," the officer stated coldly, snapping heavy steel handcuffs shut around Jamal's wrists. "You are under arrest for felony vandalism, breaking and entering, and destruction of private property." Jamal kicked and screamed like a petulant child as they dragged him out the front door and shoved him into the back of a police cruiser. The flashing lights illuminated the absolute wreckage he had left behind, but his nightmare was only just beginning. The next morning, I was sitting in my hotel room drinking coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rachel's name, I answered it simply to hear what new level of delusion she had reached. "You are a monster!" Rachel shrieked into the phone the second I picked up. "You set him up, Natalie. You intentionally left that house empty and armed with hidden cameras just to bait my husband into a trap. That is illegal entrapment, and I am going to see you locked away for it." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Entrapment?" I asked calmly. "Rachel, your husband broke into a house with a sledgehammer to steal copper wire because he owes $1 million to a criminal syndicate. I did not force him to swing that hammer. I just made sure the police had front row seats to watch him do it." "You are evil!" Rachel sobbed, her voice vibrating with hysterical anger. "I just had to drain the absolute last of Mom and Dad's retirement savings to post his bail. Do you hear me? They have nothing left because of you. My children are going to suffer because you are a jealous, vindictive sociopath. You drained their retirement to bail out a man who pushed your father down a flight of stairs," I replied, my voice completely devoid of pity. "You and Jamal deserve each other. Do not ever call this number again." I hung up the phone and blocked her number. I assumed that draining my parents dry would be the final desperate act of a sinking ship, but I underestimated just how far Rachel was willing to go to avoid facing the reality of her miserable life. She could not accept that her husband was a violent fraud, so she decided to make me the ultimate villain in her twisted narrative. 2 days later, a courier arrived at my hotel and handed me a thick manila envelope. I opened it and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. Rachel had managed to find a sleazy, aggressive local attorney who specialized in high-profile nuisance lawsuits. He was notorious for bullying wealthy targets into quick settlements to avoid negative press. I read through the primary complaint and let out a harsh laugh. Rachel and Jamal were not suing me for entrapment. They were suing me on behalf of our parents for elder financial abuse. The lawsuit claimed that I had used my massive tech wealth and sophisticated corporate knowledge to psychologically manipulate my elderly, vulnerable parents. The sleazy lawyer argued that I had coerced Carol and Richard into signing the LLC documents under severe mental distress, intentionally confusing them about the true ownership of the mansion. The official claim stated that my ultimate goal was to steal their independence and illegally evict them, leaving my poor, aging parents and my sister's family completely homeless. They were demanding the immediate transfer of the property deed to my parents and $5 million in punitive damages. I sat in the living room of my San Francisco penthouse overlooking the fog rolling over the Golden Gate Bridge. The manila envelope rested on the glass coffee table like a poisonous snake. I had assumed the $5 million demand was just a baseless intimidation tactic, but when my attorney David arrived later, his expression was grim. He tossed his briefcase onto the sofa and unbuttoned his jacket. "Natalie, this is not just a nuisance lawsuit," David said, pacing across the floor. "Rachel and this lawyer are playing a dangerous game. Because they filed a formal claim of elder financial abuse, the court takes it incredibly seriously, regardless of the absurd allegations. They filed an emergency injunction. If the judge grants it, they will temporarily freeze all of your assets pending a federal investigation." I stared at him, feeling a cold chill. "All my assets?" I asked. "You mean the $40 million from the tech buyout?" "Exactly," David replied. "They know they cannot win this case in front of a jury. The evidence of Jamal's fraud is absolute. Their strategy is to legally paralyze you. If they freeze your bank accounts, your investment portfolios, and the payout from your startup sale, you cannot operate your businesses or pay daily expenses. They are trying to financially suffocate you into signing a settlement just to make the lawsuit disappear. They want me to give them the mansion and the $5 million to unfreeze my money," I realized aloud. It was legal extortion. Before David could respond, my phone buzzed violently. It was an alert from my social media. Then dozens of notifications poured in simultaneously. I unlocked the screen and opened a link sent by a former classmate. Rachel had taken her war public. She posted a heavily scripted video on all her platforms. In the video, Rachel sat on a shabby couch holding a crumpled tissue, looking pale and exhausted, stripping away her wealthy socialite persona. She looked directly into the camera with tears streaming down her face, telling a fabricated story. She claimed her wealthy tech founder sister maliciously manipulated our vulnerable aging parents into signing over their dream retirement home. She cried about how she and Jamal were trying to protect the elderly couple from being thrown onto the streets. She painted me as a greedy corporate monster who cared more about profit margins than my own flesh and blood. The video was quickly shared thousands of times across local community pages. The comment section was a war zone of hatred directed at me. People I had known since childhood and members of my parents' country club were calling me a psychopath. They left vicious messages demanding I give my parents their house back. Some even sent messages threatening to show up at my penthouse to teach me a lesson. Rachel was successfully turning the entire Monterey Bay community against me, weaponizing public outrage to add emotional pressure to the legal freeze. She wanted me isolated and terrified. Let her post her pathetic little videos, David said, dismissing the phone with a wave. Public opinion does not dictate the law. And I just found something that is going to blow her entire legal strategy out of the water. David pulled a folder from his briefcase and spread financial documents across the table. I spent the morning running a deep background check on this sleazy lawyer Rachel hired. David explained, tapping a pen against a bank record. His name is Vincent Thorne. He has a long history of representing desperate clients, but he is not working for Rachel out of the goodness of his heart. I tracked the initial retainer fee Rachel supposedly paid him. She did not pay him a dime. The retainer was funded entirely by a shell corporation registered in Nevada. I leaned forward, inspecting the document. Who owns the shell corporation? David smiled, a sharp, predatory smile. The Shell Corporation is owned by the exact same Las Vegas syndicate that gave Jamal the $1 million loan. Vincent Thorne is not representing your parents. He is secretly working directly for the loan sharks. The realization hit me hard. The syndicate knew Jamal was broke and facing federal prison. They knew he could never pay them back, so they were using Rachel and my parents to sue me. They orchestrated this entire elder abuse lawsuit to force me to settle so they could extract their $1 million, plus interest, directly from my tech buyout money. They were using the legal system to illegally collect a criminal debt. I looked up at David, my pulse suddenly quickening as the absolute severity of the situation settled over me. "We are not just fighting my delusional sister anymore," I whispered. "We are fighting a ruthless criminal organization." 3 weeks later, I sat in a freezing, sterile conference room on the 42nd floor of a downtown San Francisco high-rise. The air conditioning hummed aggressively overhead, sending a sharp chill down my spine. Across the long mahogany table sat Rachel, Jamal, and their syndicate-funded attorney Vincent Thorne. A court reporter sat quietly in the corner, her fingers hovering over a stenography machine, ready to record every single word of this legal deposition. Thorne leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He was a slick man with a sharp jawline, cold, calculating eyes, and an expensive suit. He was not there to find the truth. He was there to break me down so the syndicate could extort their money out of my tech buyout. "State your name for the record," Thorne demanded. I did. He immediately launched into a vicious character assassination. "Tell me, Natalie." He began, pacing slightly in his chair. "Would you say you have always lacked empathy? Growing up, were you known for isolating yourself from your family, hiding in your room, resenting your parents for simply loving your older sister?" I looked at Rachel. She was wearing a conservative beige dress, trying to look like an exhausted victim. Jamal sat next to her, sweating profusely and constantly checking his watch. I turned my attention back to Thorne. "I did not isolate myself," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I was simply busy working while the rest of them were busy spending." Thorne chuckled dryly. "Busy working? You were a teenager. The psychological profile we submitted to the court suggests you exhibit traits of severe antisocial personality disorder. You are a sociopath," he accused, pointing a pen directly at me. You never attended family vacations. You refused to participate in your sister's milestones. You spent years harboring a deep, unnatural jealousy, and now you are weaponizing your corporate wealth to punish two elderly people. Is that not true? It is entirely false, I stated, leaning forward to meet his cold gaze. Let us talk about why I did not attend those family vacations, Mr. Thorne. When I was 16 years old, I worked 3 separate jobs. I bussed tables at a local diner, I tutored middle school students in math, and I did remote data entry late at night. I worked 80-hour weeks while going to high school just to save up $3,000 for a used car. The week I finally hit my savings goal, my parents demanded I hand over every single penny. Why? Because Rachel had carelessly wrecked her car and they needed my hard-earned money to put a down payment on a brand new luxury convertible for her. I did not lack empathy. I lacked a family that treated me like a human being instead of an ATM. My parents made it very clear that my only purpose was to fund Rachel's lifestyle. Rachel glared at me across the table, her hands tightly gripping the armrests of her chair. That is a lie, she snapped, her voice breaking. You volunteered that money out of guilt. The court reporter kept typing effortlessly, capturing the sudden aggressive crack in Rachel's innocent victim facade. Thorne waved his hand dismissively, trying to quickly regain complete control of the room. This is ancient history, he said sharply. Teenage grievances do not justify elder financial abuse. You are a wealthy tech founder. You used your sophisticated knowledge of corporate real estate to intentionally trick Carol and Richard into signing away their primary residence. You maliciously manipulated them because you simply wanted them to suffer. David, my attorney, had been sitting quietly beside me, taking meticulous notes. Now he placed his gold pen down on the table. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. Actually, Counselor David said, his voice projecting absolute authority. We are not here to discuss ancient history. We are here to discuss current financial realities. You claim my client manipulated her parents into giving up their house to make them homeless. But the precise timeline of events tells a completely different story. A story centered entirely around your client, Jamal. David reached down and opened his heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out a massive stack of thick bound documents and dropped them onto the center of the mahogany table. The loud, heavy thud made Jamal physically flinch in his chair, his eyes widening in sheer panic. What is this? Thorne demanded, his slick, professional demeanor finally faltering for a fraction of a second. He reached out to touch the documents but hesitated, pulling his hand back. Those, David replied smoothly, sliding the huge stack across the polished wood directly toward Thorne, are the fully subpoenaed bank statements belonging strictly to Jamal. They cover the exact entirety of the last 5 years, day by day. We obtained them directly from the federal court under an emergency discovery order. My private investigators have spent the last 72 hours combing through every single transaction your client has made, and what we found proves exactly why this lawsuit was really filed. Thorne stared at the massive stack of subpoenaed bank statements. Instead, David reached over and flipped open the top folder so it faced Thorne. Let us begin with your career, Jamal, David said firmly, leaning forward. You claim to be a highly successful independent investment broker. Yet according to your own certified financial records, you have not executed a single legitimate market trade in over 4 years. Rachel scoffed loudly, though her voice shook slightly. That is ridiculous. He manages private equity. Those transactions are confidential. They were confidential, David corrected her, tapping a finger against the highlighted lines on the page. Until the court subpoenaed them. He has no private equity. He has no clients. His sole income has been funds from your checking account and large cash gifts from your parents. Jamal sat perfectly frozen, staring at the wooden table. Sweat was visibly beading on his forehead. Thorne remained silent, his eyes scanning the documents, realizing his client had lied to him about everything. But the lack of employment is not the interesting part. David continued, turning to the next page. What is fascinating is where all that money went. Because Jamal is completely broke, yet he manages to consistently wire exactly $4,000 on the first of every single month to a luxury apartment complex in Seattle, Washington. Rachel frowned, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. She looked at Jamal, waiting for him to explain. When he did not speak, she turned back to David, her tone defensive. "It is a private client account," Rachel insisted, firmly crossing her arms over her chest. "Jamal told me all about this arrangement months ago. He manages a remote property portfolio for an investor in the Pacific Northwest. That is a business expense." I could not listen to her delusion for another second. I reached into my own briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a bank statement. It was an official state document pressed with a raised government seal. "It is not a client account, Rachel," I said softly, sliding the document across the long mahogany table directly to her. "Pick it up. Read it." Rachel hesitated. Her hands were trembling. She slowly picked up the heavy paper, her eyes desperately scanning the official text. It was a birth certificate issued by the state of Washington. "Read the name of the father," I commanded. Rachel's face drained of every ounce of color. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She just stared at the name printed clearly in thick black ink. "Jamal has a 3-year-old child with another woman," I stated, making sure the court reporter captured every single word. "A woman who lives in that exact luxury apartment in Seattle. For the last 4 years, while you and my parents have been funding his lavish lifestyle and praising him as the perfect provider, he has been using your money to fully support a secret second family." The silence in the conference room was absolute. The only sound was the soft ticking of the stenography machine. Rachel dropped the birth certificate as if it had physically burned her fingers. She turned her head slowly, looking at the man she had proudly defended for years. "Jamal," Rachel whispered desperately, her voice cracking in pure, devastating agony. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me this is fake." Jamal did not look at her. His eyes were wide with the panic of a trapped animal. His entire fraudulent life had just been systematically dismantled and laid bare in a legal deposition. The walls had completely closed in. Suddenly, Jamal snapped. He let out a raw, furious roar. He kicked his chair backward so hard it crashed against the glass wall. Before anyone could react or shout, he violently lunged completely across the heavy mahogany table, his large hands reaching directly for my exposed throat. "I will kill you!" he screamed. His face twisted in absolute feral rage, papers flying everywhere as he scrambled over the polished wood. I did not flinch. Before his hands could even graze my suit, the 2 private security guards David had stationed by the door sprinted forward. They tackled Jamal with brutal efficiency, slamming him hard onto the conference room floor. He thrashed and screamed, fighting against the heavy security guards as they pinned his arms behind his back. Rachel watched her husband being violently restrained on the carpet. The perfect reality she had sacrificed my entire childhood to build was gone. She clutched her chest, her breathing turning into rapid, shallow gasps. She let out one final piercing scream before her eyes rolled back. She collapsed onto the floor in a massive panic attack. The aftermath of the deposition was chaotic. Security guards hauled Jamal off the carpet, dragging him toward the service elevators, while he continued to shout threats. Rachel was gasping for air on the floor, clutching her chest, until David handed her a glass of water. Once she could stand, Vincent Thorne, their syndicate-funded lawyer, packed his briefcase and walked out without saying a word. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. I stood by the glass window watching Rachel stumble out of the room. David and I took the main elevator down to the underground parking garage minutes later. As the metal doors opened, the sharp sound of screaming echoed loudly off the concrete walls. We paused, stepping behind a pillar to observe. Rachel and Jamal were standing next to Rachel's luxury SUV. The pristine image of the perfect society couple was entirely gone. Rachel was hysterically hitting Jamal's chest with her designer purse and sobbing loudly. "How could you do this to me?" Rachel shrieked, her voice raw. "A child. Jamal, you have a 3-year-old child with some woman in Seattle. You took my parents' money and you gave it to her." Jamal did not comfort his wife. He did not apologize or beg for forgiveness. The mask had completely fallen off, leaving only a cornered, desperate animal. He grabbed Rachel's wrists violently, stopping her from hitting him. "Shut up, Rachel!" Jamal barked, his eyes darting around the garage. "I do not have time for your crying right now. I have less than 24 hours before those Las Vegas guys put a bullet in my head. I need to get out of the city." Rachel stared at him, horrified. "You are leaving," she whispered. "What about me? What about our children?" Jamal snatched the keys to the SUV right out of her trembling hand. "There is no lawsuit, you idiot!" he hissed, unlocking the vehicle. "We are done. Your sister won. Now get out of my way before you get me killed." Rachel grabbed the door handle, trying to stop him, but Jamal roughly shoved her backward. She fell hard onto the dirty concrete floor, scraping her knees. Jamal got into her car, slammed the door, and sped out of the parking garage, tires squealing, leaving his weeping wife abandoned alone in the empty underground lot. David and I walked to my car in complete silence. The golden child had finally met her match. By the time I returned to my San Francisco penthouse, the sun was setting. I poured myself a glass of water, feeling a profound sense of closure. The truth was out. The peaceful silence was quickly broken by my phone ringing. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I answered, expecting her to be calling in absolute shock over Jamal's secret second family. I expected her to finally fully apologize. "Natalie, you have to fix this," my mother cried the second the line connected. Her voice was frantic and breathless. I blinked, setting my glass down. "Fix what, Mom?" I asked slowly. "Did Rachel tell you what happened at the deposition? Did she tell you about the birth certificate?" "I do not care about some stupid birth certificate," my mother shrieked, entirely ignoring the betrayal. "Rachel just called me crying from a parking garage. Jamal left her, Natalie. If he does not come back, and if he goes to jail, your sister is going to be a single mother. Do you understand how humiliating that will be in our community? She will be ruined." I stood paralyzed by the magnitude of her delusion. She did not care that Jamal had stolen from them. She only cared about the social stigma of Rachel being a single mother. "You have the money," my mother begged. "Pay those loan sharks right now so Jamal can come home. Then tell the police you are dropping the vandalism charges. You have to put this family back together, please, Natalie." I took a deep breath, letting the last shred of sympathy I had evaporate. "I am not paying anyone, Mom," I stated, my voice perfectly cold. "And I cannot drop the charges even if I wanted to. This is no longer a local police matter." "What are you talking about?" my mother gasped. "Because Jamal used your forged signatures to secure a fraudulent loan and wired that stolen money across state lines to a criminal syndicate, he committed a major federal crime," I explained. "David just received the notification today. The local police dropped the case this afternoon because the FBI has officially taken over the investigation. And they are not just looking for Jamal. They are looking for the two people who signed those fake corporate documents. They are looking for you and Dad." The line went completely dead. My mother had dropped the phone. I pressed end and placed my device on the kitchen counter, feeling a profound sense of finality. Over the next 48 hours, the reality of federal law enforcement crashed down on my family with absolute ruthless precision. Jamal had spent years cultivating an image as an elite investment broker, but his entire firm was nothing more than a leased office space in a strip mall. Early Wednesday morning, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up to that office. A dozen armed federal agents stormed the building wearing tactical vests adorned with the bold yellow letters of the FBI. David, my attorney, kept me updated with real-time information provided by his contacts in the federal prosecutor's office. The agents seized every computer, every filing cabinet, and every locked safe inside Jamal's rented space. What they found hidden in the floorboards was not a list of high-yield mutual funds or legitimate offshore accounts. They found physical handwritten ledgers. Jamal was not just borrowing money from the Las Vegas syndicate. He was actively running a localized Ponzi scheme right in the heart of Monterey County. For years, he had been specifically targeting the elderly members of my parents' country club. He convinced wealthy retirees to cash out their legitimate pensions and invest in his fictitious private equity firm, promising them massive guaranteed returns. He used the money from new investors to pay the monthly dividends to the older investors, while skimming hundreds of thousands of dollars off the top to fund his luxury cars, his tailored suits, and his secret family in Seattle. When the syndicate loan fell through and his bank accounts were drained to pay his massive gambling debts, the entire Ponzi scheme completely collapsed. The FBI investigators quickly traced the trail of stolen money directly back to the forged real estate documents. That is where my parents' nightmare truly began. Federal agents did not call my parents to politely ask for an interview. They showed up unannounced at the small rental house my parents had moved into after I evicted them from the mansion. Two agents in dark suits knocked on their door at 6 in the morning. They handed my father a target letter from the United States Department of Justice. The agents informed Carol and Richard that they were no longer simply witnesses. Because they had willingly forged their names as executive directors on my corporate documents, they had actively facilitated a fraudulent interstate wire transfer of $1 million. They were officially named as accomplices. The federal government was preparing to indict them on felony charges of accessory to wire fraud and conspiracy to commit identity theft. My parents had spent their entire lives obsessing over their pristine social image. They had sacrificed my childhood and my well-being just to maintain the illusion of upper-class perfection. Now their country club friends were discovering that the perfect son-in-law had stolen their retirement funds and my parents had aided his criminal enterprise. They were completely ruined. The community they so desperately wanted to impress now actively despised them. Later that same evening, I was sitting in my living room reviewing a new venture capital proposal. The digital intercom on my wall chimed softly. It was the head of security for my San Francisco high-rise. Miss Natalie, the security guard, said, his voice professional but slightly strained. "We have a situation in the main lobby. Your parents are down here. They bypassed the exterior gate by following a resident inside. I can have them escorted off the premises immediately, but they are causing quite a scene and demanding to speak with you. They say it is an absolute emergency of the highest order." I walked over to the intercom panel and tapped the screen to view the live feed from the lobby security cameras. The high-definition color video showed my parents standing near the polished marble reception desk. My father was leaning heavily on his good arm, his shattered wrist strapped into a bulky medical brace. He looked 10 years older, his face pale and sunken. My mother was clutching the edge of the security desk, sobbing uncontrollably, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. She looked directly up at the security camera mounted on the wall, knowing I was watching. She pressed her hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture. I could read her lips as she repeatedly begged for my help. They had absolutely nowhere else to go. They were completely broke, socially exiled, and terrified of spending their final years in a federal penitentiary. They had driven 2 hours north just to show up at my heavily guarded building, begging to use my high-powered legal team to save them from prison. I instructed the security guard to keep them waiting by the reception desk. I did not invite them up to my penthouse. I took the elevator down to the ground level. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the expansive marble lobby. My mother spotted me instantly and practically threw herself forward, but the heavy-set security guard stepped firmly in her path, blocking her advance. "Natalie, please," my mother sobbed, pushing against the guard's outstretched arm. "You have to tell him to let us up. We cannot talk about this out here in the open." "There is nothing to talk about upstairs, Mom," I said, stopping a few feet away from them. "You are lucky I even came down here at all. State your business and leave." My father looked around the opulent lobby, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and absolute desperation. He took a painful step forward, favoring his shattered wrist. He did not yell or try to command authority like he usually did. Instead, my 72-year-old father slowly lowered himself right there on the pristine marble floor, dropping to his knees in front of me. "Please, Natalie." He choked out, tears welling in his tired eyes. "The federal agents came to the house today. They gave us a target letter. They are going to indict us for federal wire fraud because of those papers we signed for Jamal. We do not have the money for a defense attorney. You have that brilliant corporate lawyer, David. We need him. If we go to a federal trial with some cheap public defender, we will die in prison. Please save us." I looked down at the man who had spent my entire childhood telling me I was never quite good enough. I looked at the woman crying behind him who had openly blamed me just days ago for Jamal shoving him down those stairs. "You want David to represent you?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the vast lobby. "You want me to pay $1,000 an hour to defend the two people who actively committed federal fraud to steal my property?" "We made a mistake," your mother cried. "We were trying to protect our family. You were trying to protect Rachel." I corrected her sharply, my tone turning to ice. "You have never once tried to protect me." "Let us review your track record of protection. When I was 10, you canceled my birthday party to pay for Rachel's elite cheerleading camp. When I was 16, you took every penny I earned from 3 minimum wage jobs to buy her a luxury convertible. When I was 18, you drained my entire college fund so Rachel could have a destination wedding. And just 3 weeks ago, you willingly committed federal identity theft, crossing state lines to hand my $2 million home over to a violent gambling addict. My parents stared at me in complete silence. The brutal recitation of their lifelong favoritism hung heavy in the air. Every single time Rachel or her husband made a catastrophic mistake, you threw me to the wolves to shield them. I continued stepping closer so they could hear the absolute finality in my voice. You sacrificed my future, my finances, and my emotional well-being just to maintain the illusion that she was perfect. And now that your golden child has brought federal investigators to your doorstep, you suddenly remember you have another daughter. A daughter with money. Natalie, we are your parents. My father whispered, his voice breaking as he remained on his knees. We are blood. Blood means nothing without respect. I replied, repeating the exact lesson they had taught me. I will not pay for David to defend you. I will not pay for any lawyer. When your federal indictment comes down, you can go to the courthouse and request a court-appointed public defender, just like every other common criminal. You made your choice when you forged those documents. Now you will face the consequences. My mother let out a loud, gut-wrenching wail, collapsing against the reception desk. Before the security guard could step in to escort them out, the heavy glass revolving doors at the front of the lobby spun violently. Rachel burst inside the lobby. She looked completely unhinged. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were wild with frantic energy. She ignored our parents weeping on the floor. She marched straight to me, shoving her finger in my face. "Jamal is gone!" she screamed, her voice shrill and demanding. "He took the car and left me with nothing. I need $500,000 now to start a new life away from him, and you are going to give it to me." Rachel stood panting heavily in the center of the grand lobby, her outrageous demand for $500,000 echoing loudly off the high marble walls. I looked at my sister's outstretched hand, entirely unfazed by her manic sense of entitlement. "Are you completely out of your mind?" I asked her. "Your husband just abandoned you after blowing $1 million of syndicate money and fathering a secret child, and your very first instinct is to storm directly into my secure building and demand my money to fix your life." "You have $40 million, Rachel screamed, taking a step toward me. "I am your sister. We are blood. I need to hire a divorce attorney. I need to protect my kids, and I need to get out of this state before those loan sharks realize Jamal is gone and come looking for me instead. You owe me this bailout." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied. "You spent your entire life treating me like garbage because you thought Jamal made you better than me. You proudly paraded around that beautiful coastal mansion claiming it was yours. And now that your house of cards has collapsed, you want to use the blood card to raid my bank account." My mother, still kneeling on the floor, suddenly found her voice. "Give her the money, Natalie," she pleaded frantically. "If Rachel gets a good lawyer, maybe she can help us too. We can all get out of this. They were literally facing federal prison, yet they still believed they were entitled to my hard-earned wealth. I slowly shook my head. I am not giving you a single cent, I stated clearly. You are not my responsibility, Rachel. Your kids are not my responsibility. You chose to marry a fraud. You chose to turn a blind eye to his non-existent career because you liked the designer bags and the country club memberships. You built this life, and now you have to live in it. Rachel's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You selfish witch! She hissed, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. We are completely homeless. Jamal emptied the bank accounts. We cannot even go back to the Carmel house because the police taped off the broken windows. That is actually a perfect transition, I said smoothly. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick white legal envelope. I stepped forward and pressed it directly into Rachel's chest. She instinctively grabbed it, looking down at the crisp paper in confusion. What is this? She demanded, her voice shaking. That is a formal 3-day notice to quit, I explained, watching her eyes widen. It is an official legal eviction notice, since your husband decided to take a sledgehammer to my custom marble countertops and rip the copper wiring out of my walls, causing over $300,000 in property damage. Ocean View Holdings is terminating whatever imaginary residency you thought you had. You, Mom and Dad, have exactly 72 hours to remove all of your personal belongings from the Carmel property. If you are not completely moved out by Friday morning, my private security team will throw everything you own into a massive industrial dumpster. Rachel ripped the envelope open, staring at the formal legal text, as if it were written in a foreign language. Her hands shook violently. She looked from the paper to me, the last of her sanity finally snapping. You think you can just discard us? She asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous, venomous whisper. You think because you sold some stupid real estate software you are untouchable? You think you won. I did win, Rachel, I replied coldly. Rachel crumpled the eviction notice and smiled. It was a terrifying, unhinged smile. The corporate buyout for your tech startup has a strict morality and public relations clause, she said, her eyes flashing with malice. Jamal read about it online. If you are involved in a major public scandal before the final payout clears, the parent company can legally withhold the remaining $10 million. I stared at her, my expression hardening. What exactly are you talking about, Rachel? I am going to the tech press tomorrow morning, Rachel declared, her voice ringing with vindictive triumph. I am going to tell every major Silicon Valley blog that you maliciously stole the original core algorithm for your software from Jamal. I am going to tell the world that you are a fraud who built a $40 million empire on stolen intellectual property, and you are evicting your elderly parents to keep them quiet. I will completely destroy your personal and professional reputation, Natalie. I will make sure you lose everything you have ever worked for. Rachel turned on her heel and stormed out of the lobby, leaving our parents still weeping on the cold marble floor. I watched her go, assuming her threat was just another pathetic attempt at manipulation. She was a desperate woman lashing out because her perfect world had shattered. I did not believe she had the intelligence or the connections to actually execute a targeted media smear campaign against a high-profile corporate executive like me. I severely underestimated the absolute lengths a toxic family will go to when they want to destroy you. At 6:00 the following morning, my phone began vibrating continuously against my nightstand. It was not just a few notifications, it was a relentless, overwhelming stream of alerts. I sat up in bed and answered a call from my attorney, David. His voice was incredibly tense and completely stripped of its usual calm, professional demeanor. Do not open your email, David commanded immediately. Rachel actually did it. She found a publisher. I pulled my laptop onto my lap and opened my web browser. Prominently featured on the front page of one of the most widely read tech industry blogs in Silicon Valley was a massive headline accompanied by my photograph. It read, "Corporate Greed: How Tech Founder Natalie Defrauded Her Elderly Parents for a luxury estate. I read the article with my blood running completely cold. It was a masterclass in weaponized lies. The author had maliciously twisted the absolute truth of Jamal's federal crimes and pinned them entirely on me. The article claimed that I had used my sophisticated software background to forge the LLC documents to steal my parents' retirement home. It explicitly stated that the FBI was actively investigating my corporate holdings for wire fraud. It painted Rachel as the heroic whistleblower sister, desperately trying to save our vulnerable aging parents from my calculated financial abuse. Jamal was not mentioned a single time. The dangerous Las Vegas syndicate was omitted completely. It was a highly orchestrated, ruthless hit piece designed to inflict maximum professional damage on my career. By 8 o'clock that morning, the damage reached its intended target. I was sitting at my dining table with David when my secure corporate line rang. It was the chief executive officer of the global conglomerate that had just purchased my real estate software company. "Natalie, what exactly is going on?" The CEO demanded, his voice echoing loudly through the speakerphone. "My board of directors woke up to a viral article claiming you are the target of an active federal wire fraud investigation involving elder abuse. We just bought your company for $40 million, based heavily on the integrity of your algorithms and your pristine personal reputation." I leaned into the microphone, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "That article is a complete fabrication planted by my estranged sister," I explained calmly. "My legal team is already drafting a massive defamation suit. The FBI investigation is focused entirely on my brother-in-law, not me. I am the actual victim of his property fraud." The CEO let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. "The optics do not care who the true victim is, Natalie. The public simply sees a wealthy tech founder bullying her elderly parents. Your acquisition contract contains a very strict public relations and morality clause. Until this scandal is completely resolved and your name is legally cleared by a judge, the board has officially voted to freeze the final $10 million payout of your contract. We are holding the funds in escrow. Fix this massive public relations nightmare immediately, or we will terminate the final tranche permanently." The line went dead. I stared at David in stunned silence. Rachel had actually done it. She had successfully paralyzed $10 million of my hard-earned money over a manufactured lie. David was furiously typing on his tablet, pulling up the corporate registration of the tech blog that published the hit piece. "This does not make any logical sense," David muttered, shaking his head. "This specific tech blog has incredibly strict editorial standards. They do not just publish random, unverified gossip from an angry sister overnight. Someone on the inside had to actively fast-track this article and deliberately bypass the entire legal review department." I walked over to the window, looking out over the foggy city skyline. I thought back to the fake housewarming party at the Carmel mansion. I thought about the loud, arrogant man who had proudly raised his glass of scotch to toast Jamal's brilliance while publicly insulting me for being a lonely tech nerd. "Who owns the tech blog?" I asked David, a dark realization dawning on me. "What is the exact name of the parent media company?" David clicked a link and read the screen. "It is owned by Vanguard Media Group." A cold, ruthless anger settled deep into my chest. "Uncle Greg," I whispered. David looked up confused. "Who is Uncle Greg?" "Uncle Greg is my mother's brother," I replied, turning back to face my lawyer with a renewed sense of vengeance. "And he is the senior vice president of communications at Vanguard Media Group." Rachel did not do this alone. This was not just a desperate sister throwing a tantrum. My uncle deliberately bypassed the editorial board to publish a defamatory hit piece to help Rachel extort me. My entire family is actively conspiring to destroy my professional life to force me to settle that lawsuit. I did not panic at all, and I absolutely did not let the temporary freeze on my final $10 million payout break me. I was a tech founder who built my career on data architecture. I knew exactly how corporate servers operated. I called my private investigator and told him to pivot his focus to Vanguard Media Group. I instructed David to draft an aggressive legal preservation order demanding that Vanguard freeze all internal emails related to the article. Vanguard is a publicly traded corporate media giant absolutely terrified of liability. When David served the order citing a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit, the internal compliance team panicked. They ran an internal digital audit on the specific journalist and Uncle Greg. What they immediately found was a digital paper trail so legally disastrous that Vanguard voluntarily handed the evidence directly to David by the end of the day. Rachel explicitly emailed Uncle Greg telling him that if he published the fake story to ruin my buyout, I would be forced to settle the elder abuse lawsuit and pay her $500,000. Uncle Greg replied from his work computer, promising to bypass the editorial board, stating he wanted a 10% cut of whatever money Rachel extorted from me. They had completely documented their incredibly foolish blackmail plot on a secure corporate server. The next morning, David and I drove straight to Vanguard Media Group headquarters in downtown San Francisco. We did not ask for an appointment, and we did not wait in the lobby. David had already contacted the chief executive officer, informing him we had ironclad proof of internal corporate extortion involving his senior executive. We were escorted immediately to the top floor and guided into a massive glass-walled executive boardroom. The CEO of Vanguard. A stern man in his 60s sat at the head of the long table. The company lawyers sat nervously to his left, reviewing the evidence files. Sitting to his right, looking completely confused, was my Uncle Greg. When I walked through the glass doors, Uncle Greg's face dropped. His smug, arrogant demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by a very pale, sickly dread. He had assumed I was hiding in my apartment crying over the horrific public scandal. He never expected me to walk directly into his employer's boardroom. "Have a seat," Natalie, the Vanguard CEO, said, gesturing to the empty leather chairs. "We reviewed the documents your attorney sent over last night." Greg leaned forward, trying to salvage the situation. "Sir, you cannot seriously be entertaining this," he stammered, his voice betraying his panic. "She is a fraud. She stole my sister's house and is trying to intimidate the press." I did not say a word. I unclasped my briefcase and pulled out the printed emails highlighting the exact messages where Uncle Greg demanded a 10% cut. I slid the stack directly across the polished boardroom table until it rested in front of my uncle. Greg looked down at his own words printed in black and white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The CEO looked at Greg with absolute disgust. "You used company resources to bypass our editorial standards and publish a completely fabricated, defamatory article against a tech executive," the CEO stated. "You exposed this network to a massive liability lawsuit just to help your niece extort a massive cash settlement from her successful younger sister." "It was a misunderstanding," Greg pleaded desperately, looking frantically for an ally. "I was just trying to protect my family." "You are tearing your own career apart, Greg," I said, speaking for the first time since I entered the room. "You chose the wrong family member to mess with this time." The CEO stood up from his chair. "The article has already been completely retracted from all our platforms," he announced firmly. "We will be publishing a formal apology within the hour, clearing your client's name entirely. As for you, Greg, you are fired effective immediately." Greg gasped, clutching the mahogany table. "Fired," he repeated in shock. "I have worked here faithfully for 15 long years. You are firing me over a family dispute. You are being terminated with absolute cause for gross ethics violations, corporate espionage, and utilizing assets to facilitate criminal extortion," the chief legal officer chimed in sharply. "Security is currently boxing up all the personal belongings in your office. Leave your corporate keycard on the table right now. You will be escorted out immediately." 2 large security guards stepped into the boardroom, standing behind Greg's chair. My uncle, the man who loudly mocked me at the fake housewarming party, was now trembling in absolute humiliation. He slowly placed his corporate badge on the table and was marched out of the room like a common criminal forever. David and I walked out of the Vanguard Media Group headquarters with the absolute certainty that Rachel had fired her final bullet and missed entirely. By the very next morning, the tech blog published a massive retraction and a formal apology completely clearing my name. The board of directors at my parent company immediately unfroze the final $10 million payout. I had successfully protected my hard-earned wealth and entirely neutralized my sister's pathetic extortion attempt. I assumed the war was finally over. I assumed the swift destruction of my uncle's career would send a clear message to the rest of my toxic family to stay far away from me. But I had forgotten about the most dangerous, unpredictable variable in this entire catastrophic equation. Jamal was still out on bail. It was late Thursday evening. I had just finished a celebratory dinner with my core software development team at an upscale restaurant in downtown San Francisco. I said my goodbyes and took the private elevator down to the underground parking garage beneath the building. The concrete structure was cold, damp, and completely deserted. The only sound was the sharp click of my heels echoing off the thick concrete pillars as I walked toward my parked car. As I reached for the door handle, a tall shadow suddenly detached itself from the dark blind spot behind my vehicle. "Hello, Natalie," a raspy voice called out. I turned around slowly. It was Jamal. But he looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, polished Wall Street broker who had proudly sipped champagne in the foyer of my Carmel mansion just a few weeks ago. He looked completely destroyed. His designer clothes were filthy and wrinkled. He was unshaven, his eyes were deeply sunken with dark purple bags, and he reeked of stale sweat and sheer absolute panic. His hands were shaking violently, but in his right hand he tightly gripped a heavy steel crowbar. It looked like the exact same crowbar he had used to rip the copper wiring out of my walls. "You think you can just ruin my life and walk away?" Jamal hissed, taking a slow, threatening step toward me. "You think you can just sit up in your shiny penthouse while I lose everything?" I did not back away. "You ruined your own life, Jamal." I stated, my voice perfectly steady. "You stole $1 million from a violent criminal syndicate, and you ran a Ponzi scheme targeting elderly retirees. You did this to yourself." Jamal raised the heavy steel crowbar, pointing the jagged end directly at my chest. "Shut your mouth!" he barked, his eyes wide and unhinged. "The Las Vegas guys found me yesterday. They gave me one last chance to make this right before they kill me. I have the quitclaim deed right here in my pocket. You are going to pull out your phone log into your corporate registry and legally transfer Ocean View Holdings directly to me right now." He took another step forward, closing the distance between us until I could smell the sour desperation radiating off him. "If you do not sign that property over to me right here in this garage, I swear to God, Natalie, I will use this crowbar and I will make you disappear permanently. Nobody is down here to save you." Jamal smiled a sick, twisted smile, believing he had finally cornered me. He believed I was just a frightened tech nerd who would crumble under the threat of physical violence. I looked him dead in the eyes and I did not scream. I did not drop to my knees and beg for my life. "You are right, Jamal," I said softly. "I am a tech nerd, which means I never leave anything to chance. Do you really think I would walk into a dark underground parking garage entirely alone, knowing a violent, desperate felon was out on bail?" Jamal's sick smile instantly vanished. He looked around the empty concrete garage, suddenly realizing how quiet it was. I reached into the pocket of my coat and pulled out my car key fob. I pressed the red panic button twice. The fob was not connected to my car alarm. It was a direct transmission signal device provided to me by the United States Department of Justice. The entire underground parking garage was completely bugged with high-frequency directional microphones. Less than 50 feet away, the back doors of a heavily tinted black utility van violently kicked open. 6 heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical body armor poured out of the back, sprinting directly toward us. "Drop the weapon!" FBI agent roared, his voice echoing like thunder through the concrete structure. Jamal froze in absolute terror. He dropped the heavy steel crowbar, and it clattered loudly onto the pavement. He turned to run, but he did not make it 2 steps. 3 federal agents hit him simultaneously, violently tackling his massive frame directly onto the hard concrete floor. They pinned his arms behind his back, snapping heavy steel handcuffs over his wrists. Jamal, you are under arrest for felony assault with a deadly weapon witness, intimidation, and violating the explicit terms of your federal bail, the lead agent announced, dragging Jamal roughly to his feet. Jamal looked back at me, his face scraped and bleeding from the concrete. The realization of his absolute and total defeat finally washed over him. His bail was officially revoked. He was going straight to a federal holding cell and he was never getting out. Jamal was securely locked in a federal detention center without bail. The violent threat against my life was finally extinguished, and the reality of his decades in prison was cemented. But the legal clock on the eviction notice I had handed Rachel in my secure lobby had continued to tick down relentlessly. Friday morning arrived, bringing a heavy, damp coastal fog over Carmel by the sea. I did not go to the mansion myself. I had absolutely no desire to witness their pathetic departure in person. I sent David and a team of Monterey County Sheriff's deputies to officially execute the 3-day notice to quit. David called me from the driveway to provide a live audio update of the exact moment their false reality shattered. At exactly 8 in the morning, the deputies pounded on the heavy oak front doors. Rachel answered looking exhausted and completely disheveled. She immediately tried to argue, claiming she had squatter rights and demanding a 30-day extension to find a proper moving truck. The lead deputy did not care about her entitled demands. He handed her a court-ordered mandate and gave the three of them exactly 1 hour to gather whatever personal items they could physically carry before the locks were permanently changed and the alarm system was reactivated. Because Jamal had drained every single bank account before his federal arrest, Rachel could not even afford to hire a basic moving company. She had no cardboard boxes and no staff to help her. My mother and father were forced to scramble frantically through the massive bedrooms, shoving their expensive designer clothing and luxury shoes into heavy black plastic trash bags provided by my private security team. The absolute humiliation of my wealthy status obsessed family, dragging literal garbage bags out of a $2 million estate, was a profound poetic justice. They were finally being treated exactly how they had treated me my entire life, like garbage. The neighbors from the exclusive coastal community gathered on their pristine, manicured lawns to watch the morning spectacle. The exact same wealthy elites who had attended the fake housewarming party just days prior now whispered and pointed. My father struggled down the long driveway, with his arms still in a heavy medical brace, painfully dragging a single trash bag behind him. My mother hid her face behind large dark sunglasses, weeping uncontrollably as the heavy front doors slammed shut behind them. They stood at the end of the long driveway, surrounded by pathetic piles of black plastic bags. Rachel turned to my mother, aggressively wiping her own tears and trying to take charge of the disastrous situation. "Mom, call a premium ride service," Rachel commanded, her voice trembling with leftover arrogance. "We will go back to your house. We can stay there in the guest rooms while I figure out how to divorce Jamal and secure some sort of spousal support. We just need to get our things out of the street and regroup at home." My mother did not pull out her smartphone. She just stood there staring blankly at the expensive gravel beneath her feet. Her shoulders began to shake violently. "We cannot go to the house, Rachel," my mother whispered, her voice so quiet it was barely audible over the crashing ocean waves. Rachel frowned, crossing her arms defensively. "What do you mean we cannot go to the house?" she demanded. "I know it is smaller than this mansion, but we have no other choice right now. Just call the car, Mom." My mother finally looked up, pulling her dark sunglasses down. Her eyes were completely bloodshot and swollen with absolute despair. "I do not have the house anymore, Rachel," she sobbed openly, falling apart right there on the sidewalk. "I took out a massive reverse mortgage on it 2 years ago." Rachel physically stumbled backward, as if she had been violently slapped across the face. "A reverse mortgage," she repeated in total shock. "Why would you ever do that? Dad retired years ago. You completely paid that house off when I was in college. It was supposed to be my inheritance. Because Jamal needed capital." My mother wailed the absolute truth, finally tearing her perfect world completely apart. He told us he had a guaranteed private equity deal, but he was short on liquid cash. He promised us a massive 20% return if we leveraged the house to help him close the portfolio. He swore on your life we would have the money back in 6 months. So your father and I signed the banking papers and wired him the entire equity of our home. We thought we were helping you build your elite future. Rachel looked at my father, who simply hung his head in absolute crushing shame. Jamal had not just stolen the syndicate money. He had silently drained my parents' entire net worth, years before this mansion disaster even began. He used their home equity to fund his secret family in Seattle, but the nightmare was not over. And because Jamal stopped making the interest payments on that reverse mortgage 6 months ago, my mother choked out, falling to her knees next to the trash bags. The bank officially finalized the foreclosure yesterday afternoon. We have absolutely nothing left, Rachel. We are entirely destitute. 6 months after the evictions, the wheels of the federal justice system ground to a halt inside a sterile courtroom in downtown San Francisco. I sat quietly in the back row wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, watching the absolute destruction of the false empire my family had built. Jamal was no longer wearing his expensive tailored navy suits. He was escorted into the courtroom wearing an oversized faded orange federal prison jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles bound in heavy steel chains. He looked hollowed out, his arrogant posture entirely gone. The federal prosecutor laid out the mountain of irrefutable evidence, detailing the massive wire fraud, the fraudulent real estate documents, and the despicable Ponzi scheme that had deliberately targeted and ruined the lives of elderly retirees in our community. Jamal had no defense. He had accepted a plea deal to avoid a prolonged public trial that would have exposed even more of his syndicate connections. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, stared down at Jamal from the high wooden bench. She did not mince words. She called his actions a calculated predatory abuse of trust and sentenced him to exactly 8 solid years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Jamal hung his head as the heavy gavel slammed down, sealing his fate. He was escorted out of the side door by 2 armed marshals, completely disappearing from our lives forever. Then it was my parents' turn to face the judge. Carol and Richard slowly approached the defense table, looking incredibly fragile and terrified. Without the stolen equity from their foreclosed home, they had been forced to rely on a heavily overworked public defender, just as I had predicted. The public defender had managed to negotiate a plea agreement with the federal prosecutors, but it was not a complete escape. Because they had actively forged the corporate documents, my parents were forced to stand before the entire court and publicly plead guilty to a lesser felony charge of criminal document fraud. The judge looked at their pale, trembling faces and noted their advanced ages. She stated that sending 2 people in their 70s to federal prison would not serve the public interest. They were spared jail time and given 5 years of strict federal probation. My mother let out a loud gasp of relief, leaning heavily against my father. But her relief only lasted a few seconds. The judge then announced the financial penalties attached to their guilty plea. To compensate the victims of Jamal's localized Ponzi scheme and the legal fees associated with the real estate fraud, my parents were hit with a massive court-ordered financial restitution fine. They owed hundreds of thousands of dollars. The judge explicitly mandated that a significant percentage of their meager monthly Social Security checks and any future income would be automatically garnished by the federal government until the entire debt was paid in full. They had avoided a concrete prison cell, but they had been sentenced to a lifelong financial prison. They would spend the absolute rest of their days living in abject poverty, desperately counting every single penny, completely unable to ever rebuild the lavish lifestyle they had sacrificed my childhood to achieve. When the court was finally adjourned, I stood up and smoothed my suit jacket. I walked out of the heavy wooden double doors and stepped into the brightly lit marble hallway of the federal courthouse. I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. The massive burden of their toxic expectations was officially dead and buried. I was just about to walk toward the elevators when I heard quick footsteps rushing up behind me. I turned around and saw Rachel jogging down the long corridor. She was wearing a cheap faded dress replacing the designer labels she used to parade in. She stopped right in front of me, her eyes wide and shining with fresh tears. She let out a dramatic sigh, as if a physical weight had just been lifted off her shoulders. She stepped forward, throwing her arms open wide, trying to pull me into a tight, emotional hug. "Oh, Natalie," she cried out, her voice echoing down the marble corridor. "It is finally over. The judge put that monster away. I am finally free from him." She reached for my shoulders, but I took a quick, deliberate step backward, completely rejecting her physical touch. Rachel's arms fell to her sides, but she kept her desperate, pleading smile. "We can put all of this terrible ugliness behind us now, Natalie," she insisted, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It is just you and me now. We are the only family we have left. Let us wipe the slate clean and rebuild our sisterhood." I stood in the brightly lit marble hallway of the federal courthouse, staring at the woman who had made my entire existence a living nightmare for over 3 decades. Rachel was waiting for me to embrace her. She was waiting for me to fall back into the exact same subservient role our parents had programmed me to play. She expected me to open my wallet, pay for her divorce attorney fund, a new apartment, and support her children because she was suddenly a tragic victim. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply looked her dead in the eye, my expression completely void of any sympathy. "You are not sorry you hurt me, Rachel," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet corridor like a sharpened blade. "You are not sorry that your husband stole my property, or that he pushed Dad down a flight of stairs, or that he tried to attack me in a parking garage. You do not miss our sisterhood. We never had a sisterhood. You are just sorry that you lost your personal ATM." Rachel gasped out loud, taking a dramatic step back, as if I had physically struck her. "But Natalie," she stammered, fresh tears welling in her eyes, "I have absolutely nothing left in this world." "Then you better start looking for a real job," I replied coldly. I turned my back on her and began walking down the long hallway toward the heavy glass exit doors. I did not look over my shoulder. Behind me, Rachel's pathetic victim facade completely shattered. She began screaming my name, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. She cursed at me, calling me a selfish monster, demanding that I come back and help her immediately. The court bailiffs quickly stepped out of the nearby doors, grabbing her arms and threatening to arrest her for disturbing the peace. I walked out into the bright San Francisco sunlight, breathing in the crisp morning air, finally feeling completely free. With the criminal trials completely finished and my toxic family permanently excised from my life, I turned my full attention back to the Carmel by the Sea estate. The $2 million mansion was still sitting completely empty and silent, bearing the ugly physical scars of Jamal's unhinged vandalism. I hired a premier crew of high-end luxury contractors to meticulously undo every single piece of damage he had inflicted. I did not cut any corners. The workers spent a month tearing out the ruined drywall and replacing the stolen copper wiring. They installed brand new, flawless Italian marble countertops in the gourmet kitchen and laid down gorgeous imported hardwood floors in the main living areas. They even upgraded the shattered stained glass window with a beautiful custom piece of art. When the restoration was entirely finished, the mansion looked absolutely breathtaking. It was a perfect coastal paradise. But as I walked through the empty rooms, listening to the ocean waves crash against the cliffs outside, I realized something important. I did not want to live in this house. The property was forever tainted by the memory of my mother's betrayal and Jamal's arrogant sneer. It was a beautiful building, but it would never feel like a home to me. However, I am a businesswoman first and foremost. I did not build a $40 million tech empire by letting valuable assets sit idle based on bad memories. I decided to execute a brilliant financial pivot. Instead of putting the house back on the residential real estate market, where it would just be another luxury home, I contacted a highly specialized commercial broker. I knew the Carmel coastline was an incredibly desirable location for Silicon Valley executives looking to escape the city. I directed the broker to actively market the massive estate exclusively to high-end corporate retreat companies. I pitched it as a fully secure turnkey private sanctuary, perfect for hosting elite tech summits, executive board meetings, and exclusive corporate getaways. The strategy worked flawlessly. Because the property was already legally owned by my corporate entity, Ocean View Holdings, the commercial transition was incredibly seamless. A massive, extremely competitive bidding war erupted between three different global hospitality groups who desperately wanted a flagship property on that specific coastline. Just 2 weeks later, I sat in my San Francisco penthouse and signed the final closing documents. I did not just recover my investment. I officially sold the restored Carmel mansion to a premier luxury corporate retreat company for a staggering $3.5 million in pure cash. In a single highly calculated business move, I had taken the exact same property that my toxic family maliciously tried to steal from me and turned their pathetic, highly destructive disaster into a massive, undeniable profit. With the property officially sold and the cash safely secured in my corporate accounts, I felt a profound sense of closure. But the federal justice system was not quite finished, cleaning up the absolute mess my brother-in-law had created. When Jamal realized he was facing nearly a decade in a maximum security federal prison, he did exactly what cowards always do. He immediately turned on the people who funded him. Hoping to shave a few months off his sentence, Jamal handed the FBI the complete unredacted ledgers and the direct contact information for the Las Vegas criminal syndicate that had lent him the $1 million. David called me on a Tuesday morning to deliver the final piece of good news. The federal agents had spent the last 3 months secretly building a massive racketeering case based on Jamal's cooperation. At dawn, the FBI executed coordinated tactical raids across Nevada and California. They kicked down the doors of the illegal loan sharks and arrested the entire leadership of the underground organization. The broad-shouldered man who had threatened Rachel on my patio, and the thugs who had hunted Jamal, were all sitting in federal holding cells facing decades under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The entire criminal element that had briefly threatened my safety and my property was completely permanently neutralized. I never had to look over my shoulder again. While I was busy expanding my investment portfolio, Rachel was experiencing a completely different reality. Word travels incredibly fast in affluent coastal communities. The sheer magnitude of Jamal's federal crimes and my parents' guilty pleas had become the ultimate scandal among the Monterey Bay elite. Rachel had spent her entire adult life carefully cultivating a flawless upper-crust persona, built entirely on stolen wealth and arrogant entitlement. Now the very people she had spent years desperately trying to impress actively treated her like a highly contagious disease. Her prestigious country club membership was immediately revoked by the board of directors, citing the morality clause in their bylaws. Her wealthy friends completely stopped returning her phone calls and blocked her on all social media platforms. Without Jamal's fraudulent income or my parents' depleted retirement funds, Rachel was completely broke. For the first time in her 36 years of life, the golden child was forced to actually work to feed her children. Because she had no college degree, no professional skills, and a highly publicized federal scandal attached to her name, no corporate office would hire her. She was ultimately forced to take a minimum wage job working as a cashier at the exact same high-end organic grocery store she used to patronize. The poetic justice was incredibly brutal. Every single day, Rachel had to stand behind a cash register wearing a cheap green polyester uniform, ringing up the expensive imported groceries of the wealthy socialites she used to host at her lavish dinner parties. They would not even look her in the eye as they handed her their platinum credit cards. She had to bag their items and politely thank them for their business while they gossiped about her right in front of her face. The sheer daily humiliation of scanning barcodes for the people she used to look down on was a far worse punishment for Rachel than any prison sentence could have ever been. I thought the absolute silence from my family would be permanent. I thought my parents had finally accepted that I was entirely out of their reach. But toxic families do not simply surrender. When they lose their power, they pivot to their final and most desperate weapon: emotional manipulation. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I went down to the lobby of my San Francisco penthouse to collect my mail. Mixed in with the corporate documents and bills was a simple white envelope. It did not have a return address, but I instantly recognized the shaky, elegant handwriting on the front. It was from my mother, Carol. I took the elevator back up to my apartment, poured myself a cup of hot tea, and sliced the envelope open. I did not feel dread or anxiety. I only felt a cold, clinical curiosity. The handwritten letter was 5 pages long and drenched in performative sorrow. My mother did not mention the massive fraud, the eviction, or the brutal things they had said to me in the hospital. Instead, she played her ultimate trump card. She claimed that my father's health was rapidly failing. She wrote that the extreme stress of the federal probation and the loss of their home had caused his heart condition to deteriorate drastically. According to her letter, his doctors had given him only a few short weeks to live. She begged me to come to their small apartment in Monterey. She wrote that his absolute final dying wish was to see me one last time, to hold my hand, and to make peace before he passed away. She told me that if I did not come, I would carry the devastating guilt of abandoning my dying father for the absolute rest of my life. I sat in the quiet luxury of my San Francisco penthouse, staring at the 5-page letter my mother had written. The paper felt incredibly heavy in my hands. A few years ago, a letter like this would have completely destroyed me. I would have dropped everything, panicked, booked a car, and rushed straight to their cramped apartment in Monterey to beg for their forgiveness. I would have paid off their massive federal restitution fines just to make sure my father was comfortable. I would have played the role of the dutiful, obedient daughter they demanded I be. But I was no longer that frightened, isolated girl. I read through my mother's dramatic paragraphs again, stripping away the performative emotion to examine the cold, hard logic beneath her words. My father did not have a terminal heart condition. If he were truly dying in a hospital on life support, the Federal Probation Office would have formally notified my attorney David regarding his legal status and restitution payments. This entire medical emergency was a completely fabricated manipulation. My mother was using the ultimate emotional weapon, the threat of death, to force me back into their toxic orbit. She knew they were drowning in poverty and needed my personal bank account back. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I carefully folded the 5 pages back together and slid them into a fresh envelope. I took a thick black marker from my desk drawer and wrote "Return to sender" in massive, bold capital letters directly across the front. I finally sealed the white envelope and walked out to the main hallway, dropping it down the long building mail chute. When I returned to my apartment, I picked up my smartphone. Blocking their numbers was no longer enough. I needed a permanent, absolute severance. I called my cellular service provider and requested a complete phone number change. Within 10 minutes, the phone number I had used for 15 years, the number my toxic family had constantly abused to demand my time and my money, was permanently deactivated. I was now officially a ghost to them. The cord was completely cut. 2 weeks later, the holiday season arrived. Thanksgiving had always been an incredibly stressful, miserable experience in my family. It was usually a chaotic day, filled with my mother screaming about table settings, my father criticizing my career, and Rachel demanding everyone praise her cooking while she drank expensive wine. This year, I decided to completely rewrite what the holiday meant to me. I hosted my very own Thanksgiving dinner right in my penthouse overlooking the beautiful San Francisco Bay. The massive dining table was covered in warm, glowing candles and an incredible feast catered by one of the best local chefs in the city. But the most important difference was the people sitting around that table. I did not invite anyone out of a false sense of biological obligation. I invited the people who had actively proven their loyalty. David, my brilliant corporate attorney, sat at the head of the table, laughing loudly as he shared stories from his law school days. My core software development team, the brilliant engineers who had worked 80-hour weeks alongside me to build our $40 million company, were passing plates of turkey and stuffing. Thomas, the private investigator and process server, even stopped by to share a drink. These were the people who had stood by me when my reputation was under attack. They had protected me, supported me, and celebrated my genuine success without an ounce of jealousy. As the evening progressed, the penthouse filled with the sound of genuine, authentic laughter. There were no underlying passive-aggressive insults. There were no constant comparisons or demands for money. There was only mutual respect and profound gratitude. I stood up from my chair and gently tapped my crystal wine glass with a silver fork. The room immediately quieted down as my guests turned their attention toward me, smiling warmly. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight," I began, raising my glass toward the soft glow of the candlelight. "For a long time, I believed that family was defined strictly by the people who raised you. I thought you had to endure the pain and the betrayal simply because you shared the same last name. But this year has taught me the most valuable lesson of my entire life. I look around this room and I see my true family. You are the people who chose to respect my boundaries and value my worth. We are not bound by genetics or obligation. We are bound by genuine care. Let this be a permanent reminder to us all. Blood means absolutely nothing without respect." 2 years passed since that Thanksgiving dinner. Time has a remarkable way of revealing the absolute truth and settling the scales of justice. Life moved forward, completely cementing the consequences of every choice my family made. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Monterey, Rachel stood at the checkout counter of a discount grocery store. She was not the cashier this time. She was the customer. She wore a faded sweater, her hair pulled into a messy knot, frantically digging through her cheap synthetic purse to find crumpled paper coupons. The cashier, a teenager chewing gum, waited impatiently as Rachel carefully counted out exact change to afford generic brand cereal for her children. The country club socialite who once paraded through my custom-built Seaside mansion was completely gone, replaced by a woman utterly crushed under the weight of her own arrogant entitlement. Hundreds of miles away, inside the cold concrete walls of a federal penitentiary, Jamal faced a far harsher reality. He was marched across the stark prison yard, blending into a sea of identical, oversized orange jumpsuits. The heavy steel doors slammed shut behind him, echoing with a terrifying finality. He spent his days mopping cell block floors for pennies an hour, constantly looking over his shoulder, stripped of his tailored Wall Street suits, his expensive champagne, and his smug superiority. His secret family in Seattle had completely abandoned him. He was nothing but a federal inmate number rotting away in a cage he built with his own greed. Meanwhile, I sat in a sunlit, glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a San Francisco high-rise. I was not looking back. I held a solid gold pen, carefully reviewing a multi-million-dollar venture capital term sheet. I was officially launching my own independent investment fund, specifically designed to finance and empower female-led technology startups. I signed my name at the bottom of the document, officially channeling my $40 million buyout into a legacy of genuine creation and support. I smiled, feeling the profound, radiant warmth of absolute financial and emotional independence. Looking back on the wreckage of my past, I realized that breaking free from a toxic family is the hardest, most necessary battle you will ever fight. Generational trauma is a quiet, insidious poison. It thrives in silence, hiding behind the excuse of blood and tradition. In my family, the roles were assigned before I could even speak. Rachel was the designated golden child, the perfect reflection of my parents' superficial desires, allowed to fail constantly without consequence. I was the assigned scapegoat, the workhorse expected to silently absorb the emotional damage, fund their mistakes, and carry the heavy burden of their endless failures. They expected me to remain small, guilty, and entirely subservient. But I refused to play the role they wrote for me. Escaping the scapegoat role requires a radical, unforgiving level of self-love. It requires you to look at the people who gave you life and accept that they are incapable of giving you peace. The sweetest, most absolute justice you can ever achieve is simply outsurviving your abusers. It is not about screaming matches or seeking petty revenge. It is about quietly walking away, building a massive fortress of success, and letting them watch from the outside as you thrive without them. When toxic people can no longer control you, they will desperately try to control how others see you. They will paint you as the villain in their tragic story. Let them talk. Let them spin their pathetic lies. Their words have absolutely no power over your reality unless you hand them the pen. I took my pen back. I built a $40 million empire from the ground up entirely alone, and I did not let their immense gravity drag me down into their miserable abyss. Blood does not demand your loyalty when it continuously demands your destruction. You owe nothing to the people who only value you for what they can extract from you. Your worth is inherent, infinite, and entirely yours to protect. Now I want to turn this conversation over to you. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with toxic parents who favored a toxic sibling? Did you ever discover a secret that changed your family dynamic forever? Please share your stories of breaking free in the comments down below. I read every single one because your incredible courage truly inspires others to finally cut the cord and reclaim their own lives. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe in taking your power back from those who tried to diminish you. Thank you for listening to my story today. Remember, the strongest foundation you can build is the one where you stand alone, unbroken. The story of Natalie navigating her family's profound betrayal highlights a harsh but liberating truth. Sharing DNA with someone does not obligate you to endure their abuse. Society often conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, whispering that we must forgive every single transgression simply because they are blood. Natalie's parents and sister entirely weaponized this exact societal expectation. They expected her to endlessly sacrifice her hard-earned success, her financial stability, and her emotional well-being to subsidize their toxic choices and criminal mistakes. In dysfunctional dynamics, the designated scapegoat is often expected to play the savior, silently absorbing the damage so the golden child can remain flawless. However, Natalie's steadfast refusal to pay the syndicate debt or fold under public pressure teaches us a vital lesson. True family is built on a solid foundation of mutual respect and genuine care, not extortion and convenience. The most profound takeaway is that establishing ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Walking away from the people who raised you is deeply agonizing, yet staying in an environment that constantly diminishes your worth is fatal to your spirit. Natalie found her permanent peace only when she stopped seeking validation from those completely incapable of giving it. She redefined family on her own terms, filling her table with people who celebrated her success rather than exploiting it. We must learn that walking away from a toxic dynamic is often the very first step toward genuine freedom. When you strip away the manufactured guilt, you realize your primary responsibility is to protect your own peace. Evaluate the relationships in your life today and possess the courage to permanently walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served.